Should we begin? This is Soumya from IWWAGE.
Yes, Soumya, I think we can begin. Let's start.
Okay, great. So welcome everyone. I think this promises to be a really exciting webinar. We are all really looking forward to it, and the number of registrations just shows the amount of interest in this subject. Just to give you a bit of a background for the webinar, IWWAGE, or the Initiative for What Works to Advance Women and Girls in the Economy, is a gender research center essentially, which aims to build on existing research and generate new evidence to inform and facilitate the agenda of women's economic empowerment in India. And as part of our research agenda, IWWAGE has recently completed a study on women workers in India's gig economy. So for all of you who've joined, I'm sure you have a lot of interest in the gig economy in India. It's a very exciting industry. It is attracting millennials by large numbers, but more so women, and that's because it offers alternative work arrangements for them. It offers them flexible working hours, and because of these reasons, women have been attracted to gig platforms. But a lot of research on these gig platforms also shows that women, even though they enroll for such gig platforms, tend to be concentrated in certain sectors or trades. And those are really based on the traditional roles that women take up. So it could be domestic work, it could be care work, or beauty and salon services. And there are also issues of what happens, to social protection or wages or financial security in these jobs, because there is no certainty that you would get this much payment or this much of salary or earnings in a given month. And the recent COVID-19 crisis seems to have exaggerated that impact, because particularly for women who are involved in such services, it's not considered essential. Secondly, even households would be skeptical in inviting people to come over into their homes who are unknown and, for work like beauty and a salon or for wellness services. So there is definitely going to be a huge income shock for this segment, and also increased prospects of unemployment. So the study that we have recently completed was funded by the Asia Foundation, and it involved interviews with female service providers working with the Urban Company, formerly Urban Clap. And now some of those who don't know about the Urban Company, it's actually India's largest online marketplace for home and beauty services. Established in 2014, it offers services in 18 Indian cities and 4 countries. So we propose to present findings from the study at the webinar. We have a moderated panel discussion, which will be led by Ms. Nandita Barua, who's the country representative for India for the Asia Foundation. And we have a stellar panel, really honored and very excited about having all the panelists join us. So I'm just going to introduce them very briefly, and then I'm just going to request Nandita to take on from there. So first up is Mr. Abhay Mathur. He actually heads the finance function at the Urban Company. He's also responsible for driving the partner welfare initiatives, including women who serve as service partners on the platform. Mr. Mathur joined Urban Company in February this year. Prior to this, he spent about 15 years with Hindustan Lever across various finance and supply chain roles in India. We are very, very excited to have Ms. Rituparna Chakrabarti. She's the co-founder and executive vice president of Team Lease Services Limited. She's been instrumental in making Team Lease India the largest people supply chain company in the country. She leads Team Lease's staffing business. She also spearheads India's national employability through apprenticeship program, which is actually a very exciting initiative to solve India's employability problems. So we are looking forward to hearing more from her about that. And she's the only person from Asia to be included in the Global Power 100 and International 50 Women in Staffing roles. She's also represented the employers of India at ILO twice on issues of ethical recruitment practices and labor welfare. We also have with us Ms. Silky Raheja, who's the head of planning at the National Skill Development Corporation, and she's also heading Sankalp, which is a World Bank PPP initiative with the Government of India and through the MSDE. At NSDC, Ms. Raheja has managed many large-scale projects aimed at building institutional and training infrastructure for young people at the national level. And in the past, actually, she's led the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Kendra. Many of us know about it. It was a flagship project for the Ministry of Skill Development under the PM's Skill India mission to develop skill centers in every district of India. So we are very, very honored to have her. Ms. Sabina Diwan is the founder and executive director of JustJobs Networks. She's also senior visiting fellow at the Center for Policy Research in India. Ms. Diwan's research focuses on strategies for job creation and workforce development. And within this domain, she's been looking at the differential impacts of events like climate change, changes in technology, restructuring of trade into value chains, but the differential impact of all of these events on women and other socioeconomic groups. We also have with us Jillian Dowie. Jillian is a senior program officer on the Employment and Growth team at the International Development Research Center, IDRC. And more recently, she's managing a new initiative called Women Work and the Gig Economy, which is promising to generate evidence on gender and digital platforms from 7 countries across the South and Southeast Asia regions. So we're really hoping, Jillian, from you to hear about the international evidence and how women engage with the gig economy. And finally, we have with us Ruchika Chaudhary, who's our in-house senior research fellow at IWAGE. Ruchika is the one who's really been working on this study for us. She's the main author of the study. She's also worked extensively on issues of labor and employment, and specifically in areas of gender equality and non-discrimination in the Asian Pacific. She was previously at ILO. She's also managed research projects at the University of Manchester, has taught an undergrad course on economics at the University of Delhi, and has done a lot of fantastic research on urban poverty at the Institute of Economic Growth and the National Institute of Urban Affairs. So like you, I'm really excited to hear from the stellar panel. And Nandita, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Soumya. And again, a very warm welcome to all our stellar panelists, a group of experts which we rarely get to have all together in one panel. And I have to admit that there's an advantage to a lot of us being homebound and working from home. We are actually being able to meet more through these webinars and share our thoughts. So really honored to have you all. And I think we have a huge amount of participants. I can right now see in my screen about 137 people who have joined. So clearly this is an issue which is generating a lot of interest, and understandably so, given that, you know, during this phase of this pandemic, not just in India, globally, we have seen how a whole lot of things of our lives, which were earlier more hands-on, face-to-face, you know, in real time, have all gone virtual, and we've all adapted to it, including the webinar we are holding right now, which would have otherwise been a conference in India Habitat Center probably. And given that we are doing it this way, it's also exciting because we get to reach to a much wider audience worldwide. So I think, like you said, Soumya, we are very excited, and the HI Foundation has been working on issues of women's empowerment for a long time. You know, it's been 60+ years of our existence globally in India since 2010. And I think definitely the issues of women's security, women's empowerment, you know, economic and livelihood issues are very close to our work and our priority. So this particular study was critical to really understand an emerging, you know, livelihood platform, an economic platform from a gender perspective, and which is why we partnered with IWAGE, which is also, you know, affiliated to the Kriya University. And I'm also very glad to welcome Dr. Sundar Ramaswamy, Vice Chancellor of Kriya, who is in this seminar participating with us. And I think it was just to throw some light and for us to better understand what exactly is the gig economy doing for women from their perspective, and hence, you know, reaching out to women from the urban company to find out their thinking on it. So, I mean, I'm not going to take more time. I'm going to actually now hand over very, very quickly to IWAGE and for Ruchika to make her presentation and share with us the findings of that research. Now, keep in mind that this was a pro-COVID research. We have a new set of realities pro-COVID in this sector, which is what we would also like to hear from our panelists a bit more within the construct of the Indian economy, but also probably more globally from people like Gillian. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Ruchika to start off with her findings, and then we will turn to the set of panelists for their thoughts and their perspectives, and then have a Q&A for all the other amazing participants who have joined us this webinar. So over to you.
Thank you, Nandita. Good evening, everyone. And thanks again, Nandita, for the kind words. It was indeed a pleasure to collaborate with the Asia Foundation on this incredibly important area of work. Now, before getting to the presentation, I would like to acknowledge efforts of my research team. A big thank you to Hia Singh Rajput and Anjali Balu for doing a commendable job. And of course, other IWAGE team members for putting in the hard work. And I would also like to say that my internet connection is a bit unstable. So I hope nobody minds if I turn off the video. Next slide, please. World over, technology-driven gig economy has been expanding rapidly over the last decade. As a result, concept of work is changing, and so is the future of work in production. Gig economy has also become a buzzword in India, particularly in the last couple of years, and is attracting millennials by offering alternative employment opportunities. Now, in order to get a comprehensive understanding of the gig economy and the issues surrounding it, we should reflect on a number of burning questions. First off, how to really define gig economy? Because there is no standard definition, many people have defined it differently, and it has been called many things, such as platform economy, sharing, collaborative, contingent, mobile, or flex economy. Now, how this new form of labor should be defined? Are they the employees of the platform company or self-employed people? How this new arrangement of work is disrupting well-defined structures? What is the impact on the organization of work, structure of workplaces, and labor practices? Now, next question, which would be interesting to examine would be, what are some of the experiences of these gig workers in this emerging form of labor? What is the available legislative framework for defending the rights of these workers, and what are unions doing about it? And in the context of falling female labor force participation rates of women, one of the often cited reasons, among others, is the lack of adequate employment opportunities in the vicinity. So we should also investigate if gig economy could be a viable option for these women. And also understanding gendered aspects becomes very important in this context. And lastly, since, as has already been mentioned, we are in the middle of COVID-19 pandemic, economy is bleeding, and it has brought unprecedented shocks to the labor market. As a result, gig economy is also going through pain, and like other vulnerable workers, gig workers are harder hit. So it would be definitely important to examine the impact of this crisis of this magnitude on the future of work for these workers. However, as already been mentioned by Soumya and Nandita, I would also like to reiterate that this particular study was done long before the pandemic hit us, and therefore does not shed light on the impact of this crisis on the gig economy. Next slide, please. Since 2010, the gig economy has received much popularity and academic attention to study its extraordinary rate of growth, and also to comprehend how the gig economy is impacting the participation of people and what makes it different from the traditional work arrangements. There are specifically two main types of gig or platform work: crowd work and work on demand via app, and both have differing skill requirements. Amazon Mechanical Turk, Crowdflower, and Clickworker are some of the prominent crowdsourcing platforms, and engage online labor for performing micro tasks, such as, and such labor is known as freelancers. On the other hand, work on demand via app deals with the physical gig economy, wherein activities are executed locally but channeled online. These workers are known as independent contractors or micro entrepreneurs, or as partners in the case of urban company. Now, in India, Uber, Ola, Urban Company, Zomato, Swiggy are the quintessential employers of gig workforce. Most of the literature out there has focused largely on crowd work, and where the physical gig economy is concerned, it has suffered from an Uber bias. Means whatever is available on the model of Uber and working conditions of Uber drivers, and not much has been done about other platforms. I would also like to bring to your notice here that since gig workers do not have any standard employee contract and also have limited or no access to labor protection or social protection, it exposes them to a number of challenges, such as failing to maintain regular income and poor working environment. Besides, gig workers are unable to unionize and have very low bargaining power, which makes them more vulnerable in the long run. Next slide, please. There is no credible formal data to assess the extent of gig jobs created in India. As per one estimate, gig economy provides employment to millions of migrant workers and is largely an urban phenomenon. As per another available estimate of Team Lease, 56% of new employment in India is being generated by the gig economy, and it includes both blue-collar and white-collar jobs. Women's participation is also significantly increasing in the gig economy, but they face occupational segregation here as well, as most jobs remain restricted to traditional segments such as domestic work, care work, beauty, and wellness. Next slide, please. Despite the rapid expansion of the gig economy globally, there has been little research to date on its impacts on the gendered experiences of gig work. This lack of knowledge critically limits the ability of policymakers to understand women's experiences of the gig economy and therefore to develop evidence-based policy responses focused on economic empowerment. For this reason, we chose Urban Company to study its women service providers who are concentrated in the beauty and wellness segment. As most of you would know, Urban Company is the largest home services startup in India and employs more than 25,000 trained professionals, and beauty and wellness is its most lucrative segment. Next slide, please. Before getting into some of the key findings, I would also like to talk a bit about overarching objectives of our study, which was to investigate women's experiences in the segment of beauty and wellness, and also to explore the constraints which they face, including the issues of security, flexibility, etc., and to assess its impact on women's empowerment and agency. For doing this, we adopted a threefold approach. We interviewed workers who were approached directly through the platform. We interviewed platform managers for other evidences, and we also interviewed domain experts to gain insights into similar forms of platform work. And we ended up interviewing 88 women service providers in Delhi and Mumbai. So our study presents a wealth of interesting information, but I will only highlight some of the key findings here. First off, as literature suggests, millennials are driving the gig economy, and this is also supported by our survey findings. If you eyeball graphs on the right-hand side panel, you would notice that most of our respondents belong to the age group of 25 to 34 years, with an average age of 31. 80% of the sample women are married with children, and majority of the sample was non-migrant. 72% respondents had passed high school, and 21% had even attended college. 85% of our respondents were satisfied with flexible timings and considered it the most attractive factor along with the earning potential. So gig economy in a way offers these women the flexibility to manage the work-family balance. Next slide, please. Our survey findings also reveal that 60% women provide critical financial support and are breadwinners for their families. Their average daily earnings are about 1,500 rupees, and 42% respondents service between 3 to 5 calls each day, and 57% respondents service less than 3 calls per day. Of course, each call involves multiple services. Social networks play a crucial role in entering the gig economy. 74% of our respondents landed in their current job by leveraging referrals from their personal networks of friends, families, and neighbors. We also gathered that each professional undergoes multiple levels of screenings in the recruitment process, and induction training of 10 days is mandatory for all the partners. I quote training head of Urban Company here. Partners are trained to do everything from packing and unpacking the Urban Company kit bags to navigating the platform smoothly using their mobile phones and client interface. Next slide, please. Another very important finding is that gig economy provides economically empowering avenues. As a result, women gain financial independence and enjoy a higher status and improved decision-making power within the family. I would like to quote one of the participants from our focus group discussions. I was married into a family where I was asked to cover my face with a veil when I was asked to come for a training at Urban Club. So when we interviewed these workers, it was still known as Urban Club. When I was asked to come for a training at Urban Club, I had to wear trousers, and my mother-in-law asked me to wear the traditional attire or move out of the house. I lived with my maternal family until I completed my training. I joined Urban Club only 6 months back, and since then I earned well. My mother-in-law has taken me back with all due respect. So, we got this insight that gig economy is really providing these women lucrative options and help them gain more autonomy in the family. Next slide, please. While it's true that gig workers have benefited and able to reap advantages of this flexible work arrangement, however, they also encounter challenges. In general, there are no safety nets for gig workers. Urban company service providers are also not entitled to any other benefits except medical insurance. In fact, as revealed by analysis, service providers are most discontented with maternity benefits and incentive and increment system. On the other hand, they really appreciate the training which they receive and also other opportunities, learning opportunities, which are made available by the platform. 53% of our respondents shared that they were subjected to penalties for declining jobs, sometimes even when the cancellation is done by the customer. So control over service providers' labor is exerted via automated ratings and review mechanisms, and thereby permit platform to exclude poor performers. Our FGT participants shared their concerns towards ratings being an unfair measure of their performance. They said 90% of the customers don't give reasons for low ratings. Next slide, please. So to conclude, we can say that gig economy offers choice of work and financial independence to women, as a result of which they enjoy a higher status within the family. There is no doubt that women are the beneficiaries of the gig ecosystem, but they are also fraught with challenges. Access to benefits, safety, increasing competition, increasing consistent earnings, lack of effective bargaining power were pronounced as some of the major challenges. Now, these workers should be provided adequate labor protection and social protection and must be accorded fundamental rights of freedom of association, collective bargaining. Definitely more research is needed to fully comprehend how gig work fits into the broader labor market and also to understand best practices adopted in different platforms. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ruchika. I think that was really, a concise presentation of an otherwise a much larger report. And like you said, Ruchika, we've only presented the key findings. Yes. So just before I move into questioning some of our panelists and putting them in the spot to give us some more thoughts and their perspective on this, I do want to put some house rules for everybody. I'm going to request the participants to please post their questions in the Q&A box. We have Diana, who's kind of moderating this on the chat side. And if there are some questions which have come on the chat, maybe we can migrate them to the Q&A. It'll be easier. If you have questions specifically for any of the panelists and the speakers, then please indicate that when you put out the question. Otherwise, I will just put it broadly to the entire panel and whoever feels in that they would like to respond, and we'll go with that response. Now, I think from Ruchira, there were a couple of key things that I wanted to highlight, which she presented. One, of course, the fact that we are looking at the gig economy as the next generation of employment livelihood platform for people, young people, and also for women. I think the statistics said that 56% of the new employment being generated in India is in the gig economy. What would be also good to know is that within this 56% that's being generated, which is probably much higher now post-COVID, and I'd like to hear more on that from the panelists, is there a differential in the kind of jobs that women and men are accessing, and even in the numbers of men versus women? The other issue is that if this study showed that, and this is a small cohort, and I guess it's still extrapolatable, that 60% of the women who were interviewed claimed that they were the primary earners for their home by virtue of being engaged in this platform economy. So I think that's interesting statistics, and that also points out both at an opportunity for women, but also for a need for all of us to look at collectively, how do we strengthen the working conditions or the security measures, or make this platform much more viable for more and more women to start engaging in it, because clearly it can be a very empowering, game changer for women in the society. So that being the perspective, and the fact that we now have an extremely illustrious panel who's with us, I'm first going to turn to you, Abhay. Since the study did look at specifically at this point at the women who are employed in the urban company, and I think you do say that in the urban company official post that 55% of urban companies' earnings are from the personal grooming and wellness sector. And also, you have currently post-COVID, you also have almost 1 lakh plus people waitlisted to access the personal grooming and wellness part of your services. Now, my question, Abhay, to you is, of course, any comments that you would have on Ruchika's presentation would be welcome. But besides that, also, if you could tell us, how do you see women workers who are employed in this segment faring in the COVID situation? How do you see them increasing? How do you see their workforce participation increasing or decreasing post-COVID? And are there other opportunities that can be opened up for women in this sector? So broadly on that, and starting off with any comments that you may have on Ruchika's presentation. Over to you, Abhay.
Sure. Thank you. I think, thank you, Ruchika, for sharing the finding of the study. It was extremely humbling to see some of the comments from the participants on how they've been empowered after joining our platform. I think some concerns have been raised as well, and we at Urban Company take that feedback very seriously. Let me just give you a broad context of the beauty industry in India, and then perhaps shift to what's happened in COVID, so that we can understand context. See, there are approximately 70 lakh workers in the beauty and wellness industry in India. This is from the the Welfare Council. About 2/3 of these workers are women. So there's a sizable number of women in the industry. Most of these are from the economically weaker section of society, and in many cases single breadwinners, which we saw in the research as well. What has happened in COVID is that this industry has been hard hit. So right from the beginning of lockdown till about May 17th, the beauty and salon industry in most of the country was shut down because of safety concerns and health concerns. Even today, the state of Maharashtra does not allow salon and beauty services to function. And Delhi has started in a limited way from the first week of June. So the last couple of months have been really tough for the beauty industry. I think even post-opening, most of these workers are really in the retail storefronts and the beauty chains. There have been significant changes in the way they need to operate, need for social distancing, need for constant hygiene, and most importantly, I think the lack of consumer confidence. So consumers still are wary of venturing out, of venturing into a salon, even at this stage. So all these are significant changes to the industry, and which will take time to change. As far as Urban Company is concerned, we are seeing a similar phenomenon. Let me give you a bit of background on our model. I know some of it is covered in brief in the presentation, but perhaps I can expand. I think what we really offer is women a chance at entrepreneurship, right? So the benefits which were mentioned in terms of flexible work hours, as well as significantly higher earnings, right? So a woman beautician in a salon makes about 10 to 12,000 rupees a month. An Urban Company entrepreneur can easily make about 3x of that, right? So that's a significant step up in earnings for women. And we run something called a full stack model, right? So what does that mean? Right from identification to training, and our trainings are free of cost for all of our partners, to arranging financing for women, and I'm going to come back to that element, which is very important. To start some seed capital to start their services, to matching consumer demand and transparent pricing, and as well as offering them consumables which they need in their services. So all of these things we offer to make Urban Company the platform of choice. There are approximately 8,000 women on our platform, which is about 1/3 of the workforce. During the pandemic, we quickly realized that these professionals, as we call them, are at significant risk. And Urban Company actually took a number of initiatives to take care of people on the platform. Starting from advances we gave to them interest-free to be paid back when they could afford it, to really insurance against COVID for them, to tying up with multiple charitable foundations to offer income protection to women and men entrepreneurs who are unwell, to telecounseling. We took a number of initiatives, and these have really been appreciated by our partners on social media and in feedback to us. So that's what we did during the pandemic. Now, the other change which is evident is the consumer tilt towards safety. So we are seeing more and more consumer questioning on safety, on whether the professional has sanitized her instruments, whether he or she is practicing hand washing, sanitization, etc. So that's a big change which the industry will see and gig workers will see across, be it our platform or ride sharing or food delivery, wherever. So that's a big shift which is evident. And the entire industry is actually pivoting towards that. So we at Urban Company have actually started providing safety kits to our partners free of cost to make sure that both they and the consumers are safe during any service. And we also offer a number of other benefits like income protection during illness, etc., to make sure there is no pressing need to step out if you're unwell, right? And I think that's a phenomenon which is here to stay. The other thing which is changing is really consumer demand. So typically, high contact services like spa, like massage, will take some time to come back because consumers are still wary of availing such services, and entrepreneurs in these spaces will take some time to see demand return. So that's a big change. Equally, there are categories which will see fast, which will scale up fast. New categories which are emerging like online education, fitness training, sanitization services in homes and offices, and elderly care. We are seeing significant demand in these services, and I think there'll be a fair bit of opportunity for women entrepreneurs to take up work there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Abhay. I think key issues, yes, you indicate that you have a large segment of women, almost 1/3 of your workforce is women. And I think that probably may not be the case with other platforms which are providing other kind of services, because Urban Company is clearly providing a set of services where women, some of the skills women are bringing from their existing work, whether it's grooming or wellness and so on and so forth. But I think, as you said, there has been risk associated, and probably post-COVID, we'll still have to wait and watch how these platforms evolve. I'm actually going to, we have questions, but I'm going to park them because I really want our, the participants who have joined us to hear all the amazing speakers we have. I'm actually going to now move and post a question to Rituparna. Rituparna, I have my question for you really is looking at the fact that, I was going through what Team Lease does, and you clearly are one of the biggest platforms which are linking, the demand and supply within the gig market, gig platform, if I may say, and even both within the virtual and non-virtual workforce. Now, you do mention in your platform that the COVID-19 pandemic is changing the world of work, and employers are being reminded for the need to be more flexible and agile and fluid. And also, most importantly, the planet is undergoing a mandatory crash course in digital literacy, which will bring forward massive productivity gains. And within a month, 2020 has become the 2030 in terms of digital learning, compliance, payments, and e-commerce. This is what Team Lease is talking about. Interestingly, I think when you say that, what's going to be my question therefore to you is, if we are looking at these platforms becoming the next level employment opportunity creators post-COVID, where do you think this is going to have an impact on men versus women, or is it going to have a differential impact on men and women? Secondly, given that it is digital, given that it requires some amount of experience and practice in digital literacy and skills, do you see that there is a need to create a different kind or a newer kind of training for more women and men to be employed in this platform?
Thank you so much for this opportunity. First and foremost, I'd like to start by giving quite a few disclaimers because quite a few of my views might come out very strongly. But due regards, I think some points which have to be made have to be made. The thing is that I think I really like the fact that the presentation started with trying to define the gig economy, because a lot of confusion and a lot of theories and beliefs that are going around in the gig economy stems from the fact that I feel people have not really understood what gig economy represents, and especially in a country like India. I think gig or a gig worker or a gig economy is representative of a segment of work which doesn't really have an employee relationship. And it's very important to keep reminding ourselves that just because it doesn't have employer-employee relationship, it has flourished the way it has all over the world. And it has created opportunities of livelihood for so many people. And any attempt to compromise that would actually take away a huge opportunity. And hence, I'm very wary about any initiative, any attempts to try and equate gig work to a regular work or an employer-employee relationship, because it's going to really kill the very premise on which the gig economy thrives. Now, coming back to what Team Lease does, I think we employ about, at this point, more than 220,000 resources across the country, 67 industries. But each of these people that I deploy have an employer-employee relationship, which means these people are not the gig economy workers. These people are fixed-term contracts. These people are employees. However, I am the reason I think I'm very involved in any dialogues and conversations around the gig economy, because finally, it is an important source of livelihood, an important source of getting people out of work, which is indignified, indecent, to work, which is dignified and decent. And it is it's an important layer. Now, what COVID has done is few things have emerged because of COVID today. One, of course, is that we have seen the world revolve around this concept that all work has to be permanent in nature. Of course, it's been undergoing some amount of transformation, but essentially how organization structures have been, there's this huge central layer of permanent employees, and then a little bit of other stuff which is happening, which kind of revolves around getting job done in organization. One of the biggest shifts that's going to happen today is you will see an emergence of concentric circles. You will see a small dot, which would represent permanent work in any organization. And you will see layers of fixed-term contracts, layers of ship, and the outer layer of freelancing and gig work emerging. And the ratio in which the concentric circles emerge will keep on shifting. So the relevance of work which is permanent in nature automatically will go away. We are already noticing an antibiotic reaction that organizations today have on anything permanent. Permanent real estate, no. Permanent wage structures, compensation structures, we can't avoid it because we can't get into the kind of crisis we're seeing ourselves. And same is going to happen for employment. And hence, gig economy is here to stay, here to thrive, and here to grow. In India now, if I come to that, it's important to unpack what's going on between two kinds of segments. One is the gig work which is happening, which involves mind, and the gig work in India, I mean, from that perspective, there has been a lot of informal work happening. I mean, 88%.
Rituparna, we are losing your sound. Rituparna? I think we've lost connection with you, Ritu. Right, I think we've lost connection with Ritu. I'm just going to wait for her to get back and complete, because she was saying something very critical, and unfortunately, we don't seem to be able to reconnect with her. I'm just going to let our tech team figure that out. But in the meantime, I think while we try to get Rituparna back online. I'm going to move a question to you, Sabina. I think, you had predicted at another of the webinars or talks that you had said that the gig economy and the e-commerce will definitely capture whatever limited opportunities are thrown up post-COVID, but also that, there could be a challenge where there could be an excess of demand and supply chain. Hi, Ritu, you are back, but I'm just posting a question. Sabina, I'll hold on to that question. I'll just let Ritu complete what you're saying. Yeah, please go ahead, Ritu. Yeah.
So I think what the emergence, and especially, big thanks to the aggregators and the app-based aggregators which have emerged. What they've managed to do is essentially come out with a dignified solution to the work which was happening in the informal sector, or the people who are navigating towards the informal sector, to come and work through these platforms, and yet have the two most important things that gig workers look for, and I think including women, and especially women, which is freedom and flexibility. And I think that's a segment which has benefited, and I think that is a segment where I have seen most amount of transformation which is happening in the gig space, and I'm hoping that's going to magnify. Yes, there is a speed breaker, and I think the speed breaker honestly has happened today in the form of COVID. It would be unfair to say it's only on gig workers. Today, I think across the spectrum, whether it is in organized, unorganized, formal, big, large, I think everyone's affected when it comes to work. But I do believe that one of the biggest beneficiaries of what has happened in COVID will be the gig space. And that's something that we need to watch out for, because there'll be a much greater appetite even for larger organizations, not just individuals, consumers, like not just for someone who's looking for a salon services. Even in bigger workplaces, there'll be a greater demand for those. And that's where you will see a larger emergence of mind workers moving to the gig space. I feel that India today still have a much lesser number of people which constitute mind workers, which are operating in the gig space. But I personally feel that there will be a huge shift of those people as well, whether it's in technical skill set, content skill sets, marketing, PR, online education, teachers. You will see a massive shift that's going to happen in the days to come. I'm watching this space with intent, and I'm really excited. And I think it's a good outcome for a country like India. So, and my comments were not specifically for women, but I feel if the entire ecosystem gains, women will be one of the biggest beneficiaries in any case, because they get freedom, they get flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you. I think extremely critical point, and it actually feeds very well into what I was going to ask you, Sabina, in terms of the fact that you did make a comment and your observations that, the limited opportunities that have come out during and what will happen post-COVID in the economy, the gig economy would probably fill up that space. But you also had put a question mark in terms of whether this exceeding demand and supply imbalance, where more and more workers might want to move to the gig space, which now, as Ritu said, not just workers from the service delivery sectors, but also the mind workers. And your concern was, is that going to create some kind of a disparity in terms of the wages or the earnings that this kind of a platform economy space is going to provide? And is that differential in wage going to impact women more than men? I don't know, but that's what I'd like to hear from you.
Great. Thank you so much, Nandita, and to the organizers of this webinar for having me on today. I wanted to just start, so I'm going to answer that question, but in order to answer that question, I want to take a step back. Ritu Parna is always a very difficult act to follow because she's always fantastic. And I've said this in many public forums where I've had the privilege of speaking with her that, I'm a big fan. But I want to kind of put a different perspective on some of the things that she said. I'm going to say the same things, but slightly differently, I think. Taking a step back, I think first we have to understand the context of women's employment today. We know that female labor force participation in India is a dismal 23.3%, which is, and it's been declining over the last several years. We know that women are disproportionately employed in low value add sectors and in low value add jobs, often in the informal sector. We know that even of the real wage workers, irregular wage workers, 66% of women have no contracts, and over half actually have no paid leave or no social security. And this is the regular wage workers. So we know that the environment in which India's women are working, whether informal or formal, is actually a very precarious environment. I think what is imperative to recognize when we start talking about the gig economy is that the social norms and the social structures in which our women go to work today have a strong bearing on the opportunities that are available to them, right? And if we look at, for example, how women are allowed to access or have access to technology, 46% own cell phones. Only 46% of women own cell phones, of which even a smaller share own smartphones. And of those that own smartphones, not everybody uses them. Even a smaller share uses them. So what we're actually talking about is this very restrictive social context in which how women engage economically is moderated significantly. Now enter gig work, and I think it's important to recognize that although gig work has been growing exponentially, it is certainly not going to be a panacea for women's employment. We have to address these broader concerns, and within that, the context of the gig economy. There is no doubt that companies like Urban Company, formerly Urban Clap, or Etsy, for example, are providing entrepreneurship opportunities for women that may or may not otherwise have the opportunity to balance income generation with their domestic responsibilities. Of course, this is a very positive development and something to recognize. However, how many of these women actually have the opportunity for economic mobility? Am I going to forever be gender stereotyped into making clothes and providing beautician services, or will I be able to actually transition into what Rituparna was just talking about, the mind work or the knowledge economy, right? And for that, education and skills become extremely imperative, and access to education and skills. So we know that a very small share of the population, only 2% actually, in general, have any kind of technical education in India. That's both male and female. So you can just imagine of that 2%, how much smaller the female share of that 2% is. That's technical education. If we look at undergraduate, women's share of education in engineering and technology. So 70% of those enrolled are male and 30% are female. 43% of women are in IT versus 67% of men. So, and this is again, this pie becomes smaller and smaller of women that are actually obtaining the skills, obtaining the kinds of education that are going to allow them to really obtaining the kind of access to technology that are going to allow them to actually use technology, and therefore access gig work to really build stable, sustainable economic trajectories for themselves, right? So I think it's also extremely important for us to look at this ecosystem of gig work on socioeconomic terms, right? And differentiate between, those women that are sort of using their hands to provide at-home or location-based services versus those that are engaging in certain high value-added activities. And there's far fewer women that have access to the higher value-added activities. And I'll make two more quick points and then I'll stop. The idea of freedom and flexibility. I absolutely agree that both freedom and flexibility are extremely prized in today's environment, particularly in a post-COVID environment. But we do have to ask ourselves that as more men and children, more men are staying home from work and more children are staying home from school, is the number of hours that women are spending on domestic responsibilities rising exponentially to where they absolutely need the freedom and the flexibility to participate in an economy at all, right? There's already a distributional problem when it comes to domestic work. And research supports that. I hate to say it, Indian men have some of the most dismal records in terms of doing their share of housework. And this is a globally recognized fact, and I'd be happy to share the study. I think that we really actually have to consider this broader ecosystem and the constraints on women before we can actually think through how the gig economy is providing opportunities for women, and particularly economic mobility for women. And the last thing, Nandita, to your point, I do think that the gig economy is going to grow. And I think what's going to happen is that we're going to see, for example, taking beauty workers, people are perhaps for some time to come going to be uncomfortable about going to a salon. And so eventually we might see an uptick in opportunities for beauty workers or other types of service providers for in-home services. Nonetheless, I think if you start to see in any sector a lot of workers that are crowding into a given sector, it inevitably depresses wages and working conditions. Right? If there's a surplus, a labor surplus, then there isn't that incentive to actually provide better wages or provide social protections, because you know that if one worker leaves, you have 5 others in line that are ready to take the job, and that's just a fact. So so I think that while on the one hand the gig economy is poised to grow, I'm particularly concerned about the opportunities that women have for participating in a broader range of gig economy activities, particularly the knowledge economy, as Rituparna pointed out. And then I'm also, I do think that we need better protections, and I can elaborate on that in a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabina. And I think, again, extremely valuable point. And I have to tell you, we have already reaching 30 questions. So there's a lot of interest in what all of you are saying. And there's a huge audience which is waiting to hear more. We should have probably made this a 2.5 hours webinar. Anyway, we'll do with whatever time we have. But in light of what you just said, Sabina, in relation to, and what also Rituparna also indicated, is that, what's the kind of work women are going to access in this gig economy? Is there, are there enough women out there with the kind of mind work that this, this informal setting will allow, a non-permanent work structure is going to require? Or is it largely going to be more of the lower end service delivery? Not to say that those are unimportant work, but not in the higher value chain of work, as you mentioned. And having said that, I'm going to move to you, Silky, with a couple of questions, since you represent one of the most important institutes, which basically provides a lot of skills training and opportunity. And I know you have a tie-up also with Urban Company, where you have this initiative to train more people in this sector. So in the context of what everyone has said so far, how do you see India being prepared to create the skill set or provide the skill set to, and build the human capital for both men and women to be able to access this gig platform with a higher negotiation ability, so that you can go there to meet the demand? Is that something that is in the thinking of how NSDC is working, or the government is thinking in other sectors? And do you see a great demand from corporates which is coming out for you to start focusing on providing a workforce with the skill set needed for the gig economy? Sorry, you are muted, Silky. You'll need to unmute.
Thank you, Nanda. I will answer your question. Thanks for extending this opportunity. to the organizers. So while I'll answer your questions, I'll go a little back on the presentation and what Sabina and Rituparna just mentioned. See, the way I look at it, and it's my personal perspective, COVID has had an impact on the world economy, and it will in short term have an impact on the gig economy as well. While some of these sectors will see very low demand, like in the case of beauty and wellness. But the way I see it, we normally limit the gig economy to the platform jobs like Ola, Uber, Zomato, Urban Clap, which of course have extended opportunity to women in the recent past. But on the other hand, if we see the way the world of work is changing, the way the economies and the countries are becoming flexible about work from home, the acceptance about work from home, there are a host of other jobs like, data entry, telemedicine, call center executives, which just may need an internet and a machine, and they can also form a big part of gig economy as we go forward. And they do provide the required flexibility to a woman or a man for that matter to work from their homes, providing them the required flexibility and the comfort of home, the work-life balance that they have always needed. So in this whole discussion, the arguments have been, and the discussion has been on the safety nets. Yes, that is to be discussed and provided. There are both sides to the whole story. And from the skilling perspective, we certainly feel that preparing women for the forms of employment that are attractive to them, such as gig economy, which are more flexible work models, are especially relevant given that there are about 340 million women who are not in the workforce just because they're attending domestic duties. We have done an internal analysis. While there is about 2%, which everyone does quote that the economy, it's formally skilled. In India, 2% is the number of people who are formally. Our analysis on the basis of CMI database says that there is 42% people who are skilled, whether it be to formal or informal sources. They may not have a certificate to prove, but they are skilled. Maybe they've learned it over the jobs. So there is enough skills. It's just about connecting the supply to demand. And of course, there is a long way to go in terms of skilling. Moving on to the question that you've specifically posed, Nandita, from NSDC's end, right, we've always had a focus on training women as such in all our programs, and the outcomes have been quite equal when we see. So when we train women, we implement the biggest skill development scheme for the central government, which is the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana. We see 50% of the women that are trained under the program are women, which is likewise for the paid courses as well, which is 40% where the women is paying for the training delivered. What we've seen over the years, and is interesting, while women dominated in sectors like apparel, beauty and wellness, and healthcare, we see an increasing presence in non-traditional roles, such as those of electronic and hardware. We saw 3D women going towards 3D printing, women going towards hardware repair. So thus, a field technician is another role that women are increasingly picking up. In World Skills in Kazan, it was a woman welder who kind of won a medal. So they are picking up non-traditional job roles, and tomorrow they will connect to platforms like Urban Clap, Urban Company to be able to deliver these services on ground. Several of our training partners have picked on this trend and are promoting trainings exclusively for women in areas of digital and financial literacy, entrepreneurship, website design, etc. Since when we look at gig economy, and of course you guys can add that skills like financial literacy or digital literacy, entrepreneurship, they become highly important when you want to be a part of the economy, and they have to be portable. So you should be able to carry it from one kind of job to a similar job in that sector. So what we thought that this skill set is becoming increasingly important. Why? So we launched a EEE module. We call it English Entrepreneurship and Employability module, which trains people in 21st century skills. It's a 160 hours module focused on soft skills, digital and financial literacy. So this is given to all trainees trained under the PMKVY, most of the trainees under the PMKVY, so that they have these skills also when they go out to work or they start their own ventures. Also, taking cue from COVID, we have introduced a safety and a hygiene module in all our courses. Right now, it's all online, but we've introduced that. Looking at COVID, the safety and hygiene point is gonna become really important in all the jobs that we do. So that's started happening. Overall, we are promoting new roles like AI, 3D printing, etc. for women, and it's seeing participation also. There's a platform by NASSCOM and NSDC which provides access to women or men, for that matter, to go online and pick the course of their choice from the Industry 4.0 list. On the entrepreneurship side, we've felt that, you know, women, while they, and that's true for anyone to pursue entrepreneurship, there is hesitation and there's a lot of hand-holding required. So we've been talking to various industry, to partners and private sector players to be able to support us on women-centric projects. So what we recently did with Britannia was we launched a first ever online skill development course for homemakers who have entrepreneurial aspirations. So this course is called Enabling Women Entrepreneurs, and it's designed to empower them in you know, information technology skills and micro-entrepreneurial skills. So it provides them easy access to the training from the comfort of their home, so they can you know, access it. So especially in the COVID times, if you were to see, Nandita, the returning migrants have become a larger of our concern, and how do we really redeploy these people? So on the international front, we working with MEA very closely to gather the database of people who are returning under the Vande Bharat mission, under the Swadesh program. And we have the database, which is their contact details plus what skill sets do they have. So we are planning to connect them with the possible employment opportunities in the areas that they are, with our SMIS portal, which is the skill management information system, which intends to map supply to demand. So we are going to soon do that. We already have a database of about 16,000 plus migrants who've come back, which are soon going to be connected to possible livelihood opportunities through this platform. While on the domestic front, which I feel that, you know, with the way world of work and even Rituparna's stress on that is evolving, it actually becomes an opportunity for a person who's gone back and is adequately skilled to be able to contribute from where they are. They don't really need to move back if they are trained and have the opportunity. The way the experience around that is changing. For the people who need to remigrate or reverse migration has to happen to the place of work, I think a lot will need to be done, because the priorities of families in terms of investing in training for women or a woman moving out is going to become more stringent. And overall hysteria about people who've gone back, how would they come back, their own anxieties. We'll have to do a lot on migration support to be able to bring back the people who've gone back to their homes. I think I'll just end it there, and we can come back to specific parts if there are later.
Thank you so much, Silky. I think critically what I feel that from what you said is, yes, there is, you know, I can see that there is a lot of space to train people differently, but also, as you said, there is also, in a gig economy, in a virtual economy, it's also an entrepreneurial skill that you need, and there are certain behavioral softer skills that are also required alongside the technical knowledge of the you know, service that you're providing. And I think that's also brings us to the point of, you know, how is that going to be differential for men and women? And I think there are questions on that in the Q&A, and I'll come to that. But I'm going to go to Gillian now. And, you know, Gillian, thank you for being patient. And there's a lot has been said. We've talked a lot from the Indian context, but you work beyond India, and you worked in other countries, and you probably dealt with more, you know, such kind of platform economy related issues in other countries. What would you think that other countries may have done which India could look at as a good practice? Are there good practices out there? What is it that India can do to improve what we are doing currently in this segment? So your thoughts on that, Gillian, and specifically if there are things that you feel that we need to focus more from the lens, it's good to hear that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nandita, and thank you for inviting me to join. This has been a really great discussion so far. So I will kind of zoom out a little bit to talk about experiences across the world, but I do want to say when it comes to gender, and particularly I've been focusing, lately, of course, on the impact of COVID. There is not a ton to offer in terms of good practices. Things have been evolving so fast, and the responses from firms, for example, have changed from day one right up until now, because there's this constant sense that things are changing, things are doing things we didn't expect, it's lasting longer than we thought, so on and so forth. Like, the impacts are really hard to keep up with everywhere. But there are 3 different groups that I would say we need to learn from in terms of the response, to be honest. So obviously there are firms, and there are examples. Response?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Can you repeat the last sentence?
Oh, my connection might be poor. I was just saying that there are lessons about firms and the way that they've responded from the perspective of wages as well as health responses. Can you hear me properly again? Yeah. Okay. So there are some examples, and this has happened also in India, to be honest. Like, there are some examples of important responses, like adding to the rate. I believe Amazon did that in the US and I think in India as well, adding, an extra $2 or something like that to the hourly rate of a worker, or removing the commission. There's an example from a platform in Turkey where a commission was actually, like, the full commission, 100% was removed from the cost of the driver for doing driving work. And I think if you're interested in sort of a few more of these specific examples, the Fair Work Foundation has been doing a lot of really excellent work keeping track of this over time. And so you can find more there, and they're continuing to do this as things evolve. This is sort of an ongoing process, and it's really useful to see some of the benchmarks. But the issue, though, is that these responses are generally not particularly gender sensitive. And basically, what that basically means from a wage perspective is that if you work more, you'll earn more. But there are not very many examples of wage replacement for those who cannot work. In South Africa, there was one example of a domestic work platform that encouraged customers who were canceling their services to sort of, provide some kind of a bonus to the workers so that they would receive that. But these kinds of initiatives that rely a bit more on forms of charitable contributions aren't really sustainable over a number of months or longer, while the demand is really contracted and while people aren't comfortable having people entering their homes and doing these kinds of things beyond just a lockdown. In terms of health, there are platforms, and we've seen many of them in India as well, all over the world, providing personal protective equipment and sanitizer, of course. But interestingly, actually, in the beginning, there was, in some cases, I think this is particular in the US, or at least from what I saw, a bit of a pushback on that, because it was almost as if providing that was an acknowledgement of an employment relationship. But that has largely changed, because consumers also need confidence, workers need confidence. So we've seen a lot of that, providing personal protective equipment. But that said, in Thailand, the Just Economy and Labor Institute, they've been actually doing quite a lot of work on women working as care providers in the gig economy, and they have provided some insight to us that while care providers, in terms of direct care, caring for people like elderly care and childcare, have largely been able to access this protective equipment quite easily, women working in domestic cleaning, for example, were struggling a lot more to access this, and were being sort of left on their own to figure it out. So some of these responses are also really inconsistent. And there are also examples of paid sick leave, and this one's really essential. This has existed in some limited, in a few platforms around the world. This has existed for some time. I think there's been a sudden large rise in the number of platforms that are providing some kind of paid that, and hopefully this continues beyond the pandemic as well. None of this particularly replaces lost wages, but can of course ease elements of the challenges that workers face and give them confidence in working. Again, not particularly gendered, because a lot of this really is looking at people who are doing deliveries and drivers and things like that, whereas women are the ones who are sort of, at least in terms of on-demand work, are actually losing their ability to go out and do this sort of work. The other group that we should look at is that there's a really significant role, obviously, for the government here. And we've talked already about social protection and heard about the sort of lack of coverage for gig workers, but that extends so much beyond just gig workers in the economy to a much wider net of workers, India is moving in the direction of acknowledging gig workers as a kind of, like an independent contractor or working for an aggregator, which therefore will eventually give them access to certain social insurance schemes. But there are some examples from countries like Germany, where gig workers have actually been classified as employees, or the UK, where they've actually been classified as three different things. One is workers, as in employees to an extent, the other is dependent contractors, and the other is independent contractors. And so it depends on the nature of the work that you do. But as a result, in Germany, for example, these workers who have lost a lot of their incomes have actually been able to claim wage support from the government because they have lost the wage. And in Canada, there's been a similar program where self-employed workers who can just prove that they have lost a significant amount of their wage, and self-employed does cover gig workers in this case, they were able to also claim emergency benefits. This is much harder. Like, these examples are much more difficult to implement in places where social security systems are already very strained, already inadequate for the diverse and often very informal economy. And I think that what this pandemic actually emphasizes is the need to not separate out types of workers, but to look at universal systems where, especially in times of crisis, people can claim benefits and they can do it more easily. Like, there's so many barriers, even in countries like in Thailand, there are examples of gig workers who are considered part of a social security scheme. They work enough hours, they've registered, things like that. And even they haven't been able to access their benefits because there's just so much paperwork and there's so many challenges in figuring out how to do it. So there are quite a lot of challenges there, but I think there's a huge role for that. And then finally, the role of the workers. And this is actually super important. Throughout many, many years, worker unions, formal, informal, other kinds of collectives of different kinds, there's been just such a long history that gig workers can learn from. And in fact, in the last few years, gig worker collectives have, in other contexts, like largely, again, in sort of higher income countries, gig workers collectives have been able to go to court or get support from formal unions and things like that to get more recognition and to get things like, you know, social security contributions to an extent, or some kind of paid leave, you know, temporary maternity leave, things like that. There are some examples. And during the crisis, this has come through pretty early on in people getting access to personal protective equipment when that was still not really happening as easy. Some people sort of advocating for hazard pay in certain gig jobs, again, largely from the US. And I think that on this, I also just want to know that there is an increasing interest in the role of cooperative or worker-led model platforms that are much more locally driven and can be designed sort of with the needs of workers central to it. For example, a women's group could develop that. And this is a growing area that's linked to the kind of responsible business movement. And I think that we do need a lot more evidence on this platform model and what it needs to succeed and to grow. But there is a lot of opportunity there to create real opportunities for more positive outcomes for women workers. Yeah, I think I would leave it at that. But just to say, yeah, there are the good practices out there in response to the pandemic are slow in coming in. But I think that the pandemic will shift a lot of practices to be more decent afterwards as well. Like, a lot of these decisions might be lasting, things like healthcare, things like certain types of leave that are paid. Like, I hope to see all of that become more long-term, and likely they probably, it's harder to take away benefits than to provide them. So hopefully they do become more long-term.
Thank you. I think critical questions, you know, it actually leaves us with more questions and more to understand about this sector of work. And I think, as you rightly said, there is this whole challenge of the way the gig economy workers are defined, and that definition leads to what benefits and services they can access in each country, depending on what the legal framework for workers are in the country and the definition. And that's what I think Ruchira began when she started up her presentation. So we have, I guess we have only about 15 minutes or so for Q&A, and believe me, there are 41 questions. Clearly, I don't think I can take all that 41 questions. What I'm going to do is start throwing a few questions, and I'll let you know, whoever says raises your hand, I'll just go with the person to respond. I think one of the things that is repeatedly coming up from the audience is, Yes, we've talked about the flexibility and the freedom of working in the gig economy that it gives to women. But the question that people are asking this, along with this flexibility and freedom, does it at some point also reinforce the stereotype where it says, women, you have the flexibility to go, but you therefore also, the flexibility comes with the added responsibility of taking care of household work, some of it which we heard coming from the speakers who just spoke. So is it going to undermine the women's ability to negotiate work and housework, economic work and housework? So that's the question. So is there a challenge there, therefore, when you say you're giving women the flexibility and the freedom, which is great, but is it coming with the added burden of them then therefore also being made responsible for housework? Because after all, it is operating within the same set of patriarchal norms. So question one, and whoever wants to go, and then I'll throw the other question.
I can quickly add something to that. So I think that that's absolutely right. And there has been quite a lot of research that's documented the promise of flexibility versus the consequences for some of the women who end up feeling sort of socially isolated and constantly, and this is a little bit more, the research that I'm talking about is a bit more on the knowledge economy, but constantly at the beck and call of needing to do this work. So up at midnight, up at 2 o'clock in the morning, up again at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then taking care of their kids, getting them to school. And there are some ways that the flexibility, while it exists, like there are ways that platforms actually can disadvantage women in particular. Like if you think about Uber's surge pricing in places where there are more women Uber drivers, the time when you're receiving a surge price, which is more money, is the time that you're getting your kids ready for school and you're getting them there. And that's still a responsibility that you have. So there are ways that this sort of, this disadvantages people. And the other thing, I just want to say very quickly, there's a piece of research by Learn Asia, and they're an organization based in Sri Lanka, but they've done a lot of work on the global south. And one of the findings that they had from a survey in Sri Lanka, I think it was also done in India, but I'd have to check for sure in Sri Lanka, was that the kind of knowledge, like virtual knowledge work that men were doing, their families, the families of these men didn't consider this sort of real work. It was like something they did for now to make some money, and then they'll get a full-time job later. But women doing that work, everyone was very happy with. The families were actually quite satisfied with that because it allowed women to be home when they needed to be home, to contribute to the household, to earn a bit of income on the side, but not actually have to go out of the house. There's also that movement beyond the home issue that is really important and can be really constraining, particularly in cases if there's situations of violence and things like that. So there was this sort of acknowledgement that men, it's not real work for men, but for women it's perfect because they don't really have to challenge the structure in which they're meant to live. But that's, yeah. But otherwise it is quite flexible as well, to be fair, so yeah.
Did you want to add something, Sabina? Because I know you've talked about this in terms of, whether the current structures are we're starting from a sub-negative status for women. So where do we go with this?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with Jillian. And I think the fundamental point is this, that, if given the opportunity, and now is a perfect example in a post-COVID world of having to work from home and having the flexibility, many women might choose it, but the critical question is whether it's a real choice or not, right? Are you doing it because you have a disproportionate burden of home care and unpaid work that means that you have to stay at home and that's the only way you can generate an income? So, to many of the online sort of gig work platforms that I've spoken with and other experts, I bring this issue up of the importance of women kind of going outside the house and reclaiming public spaces and making themselves sort of present is extremely important to their progress, both societally and economically. I understand the value but for me, it is a choice. There is no one saying to me that I have to do all the housework or that I can't go out. And so I think that that's a really important nuance when we're talking about flexibility. We have to actually take that into account.
Thank you. Abhay, I'm going to turn to you because there's also a whole set of questions about, what kind of social security measures are there for workers in this sector, while we also have to relate that to what Ritu had said earlier about, you need to make a difference between gig work and formal contractual work, because there's also power dynamics within that, and you need to challenge it. So don't try to push gig work into the same setting as formal work. But as we all know, formal work has a long history of laws and legal systems and policies and securities and so on and so forth. Coming to the gig sector or the platform sector, what do you think are some of the incentives that can happen? What is your sense of what level of social security can be given without compromising the overall structure of a gig platform, which actually frees you from an employer-employee kind of relationship?
Sure. I think two comments. I think one is during the COVID time, we've seen every single platform step up and extend benefits for people on the platform, be it insurance, be it paid leave, be it a number of other initiatives, right? So I think platforms have stepped up voluntarily to help people because, frankly, these are the income generators on the platform. Right? So that's one. Second, I think the government has recognized the need for a social security net for gig workers. When the finance minister announced the overall economic package for the recovery of the economy, social security bill for gig workers was part of that list. There is active engagement amongst platforms and the Ministry of Labor to really define this net and set up a fund to help gig workers in their time of need. I'm hopeful that will soon see the light of day. So that is already work in progress.
Rituparna, would you like to add to that in context of what you said about the difference in dynamics of gig work versus more contractual fixed work?
Oh, absolutely. I was waiting for my chance to comment on that. I think for gig economy to thrive and reach its potential in India, we should keep the government out of it. It's too premature for the government right now to try and legislate the gig economy. And I think, as you can see, California is still struggling with the AB5. Mm-hmm. And I think United States is a far more developed economy. I mean, the United States, 100% of the workforce is formal. And hence, where now conversations of the nature that exist on AB5 are coming up, and I think that's also been severely contested. But I do believe that between aggregators, we could look at a possibility of two things. One is, yes, I do believe that given the scale at which some of the aggregators operate, they would be able to negotiate and come out with specific insurance schemes, which, by the way, I don't believe gig workers need any dole-outs. I actually believe that if you create a scheme and get gig workers to participate in advance, which means that they are investing fully aware and as a choice into a protection scheme or an insurance scheme, and I think that would help them in future whenever they need it, right? That's one. And secondly, I think there is a possibility of creating a benevolent fund or under a foundation, which essentially actually is an emergency fund or an exigency fund to some extent, which can be created to support gig workers. And again, look, I don't think even trying to attempt to compensate for the wage, because that's the choice. That's the beauty of being in the gig economy. It's high risk, it's high gains as well. So yes, the risk is the choice with which people walk into it. But having said that, I think these two things, one is coming out or negotiating an interesting, exciting, affordable insurance scheme. And secondly, the option of creating a benevolent fund, keeping the government out of it at this point of time could possibly be a way forward in terms of handling emergency and exigency situation. And I'm saying it's like a COVID-like situation is when that benevolent fund or an emergency fund comes into picture. So that's my point of view when it comes to trying to regulate at any point anything to do with the gig economy. It's important for all of us to bear in mind that India has 88% of the workforce in the informal sector, in spite of being one of the most legislated, is not because always that employers had an intent towards doing that. As a matter of fact, the informal sector works is so big in India because candidates or individuals have made the choice to be in the informal sector, because there is no gap between haath wali tankha and chitti wali tankha in the informal sector. But if you're in the formal sector, the burden, and especially at the bottom of the pillar, of having 45% sometimes of mandatory deduction on the CTC is too much, honestly, a gap. And that is why you see such a large informal sector. And that is the reason I am somebody who strongly believes that premature load bearing, premature legislation of the gig economy can be disastrous for its future.
Right. Anybody would like to comment on this from within the panelists? Yes, Sabina, please go ahead.
Thank you, Nandita. I was just itching to respond to this. So I don't disagree with the fact that we might want to reconsider some of the mandatory contributions in the formal economy. I do, however, strongly, Rituparna, I love you, but strongly disagree with the notion that it is a choice that workers have to be in the informal economy. We know that many of the workers in the informal economy are there because they have to do some kind of work in order to make ends meet. And the fact that they're in the informal economy without any protections is actually a real embarrassment, I think, for a country that claims to be an emerging market economy that had for years, not recently, but had for years enjoyed high levels of economic growth. I think it's an embarrassment that 71% of even our regular wage workers have absolutely no written contracts, and 50% have no social security at all, even in the formal sector. So I agree that we need to look at our labor regulations. It's not about more or less regulations, it's about better regulations. I also agree with the fact that what happens in terms of a private fund to cover gig workers is fine. But I think, as Jillian said, inevitably, I think as the lines between informal and formal become blurred, both because of precarity in the formal sector and because of the large informal sector that we have to find a way to cover workers. We have to find a way to provide social protection, and the only entity can do that is government. And we're seeing that with COVID now, where our public institutions need to step up and need to be strengthened in order to be able to rise to the challenge should such a challenge emerge. So, I absolutely think that, government needs to step in. And the last thing I'll say is in our labor codes right now, social gig workers in the Social Security Code are kind of mentioned as a category. They're defined, but when it comes to actually saying what protections they're getting, the government has kicked the can down the road. So they're like, we'll deal with this at some point later. I don't necessarily object to that. I think we need to think about comprehensive ways to cover the self-employed workers in our economy, the informal workers in our economy, including gig workers. And any private mechanisms are separate, but our government needs to do their job. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, we could actually have a much larger debate on that and go on. But I have, and we're running out of time. I have barely 4 minutes, and I do want to not hold you back beyond 7:30. All of us at work. Silky, a quick question for you. I think one of the things we did talk about was the huge gap in access to technology, right? Between men and women, and the fact that a lot of the work in the gig economy, whether it's mine work or it's service sector, requires not just knowledge, but even access, your ability to have a smartphone or a gadget with which you can operate. In light of that, as somebody who is in the space of trading, what do you think can be done to facilitate greater access for women to be able to access technology so that they can have a bigger role in what is clearly, from all of you, looking to be an emerging sector of employment or at least livelihood for people in the coming years.
Yeah. So I will take on from what Sabina actually mentioned. See, in order to create this access and access to technology particularly, it will require the private sector and the government to come together in many ways. So if you look at urban company right now, if they are providing a beauty kit to a beauty professional, or a Uber or a Ola is providing a car or to a driver on a subsidized cost or some models, it will require models like that for private sector to come up with if they want people to be available to them to be able to work in gig economy. And also from the government side, the government will have to look at how the internet and how the laptops and other equipments can be provided to these workers on a low cost so that they can contribute to such kind of demand. So it will require both the sides to come together, I would say.
Thank you. I think a lot of the questions actually that we have got over around the issues that we have discussed. It talks about the challenges in terms of social security, and Abhay talked about it, and we talked about what can be done. But at some point, when you look at legislations and legal norms that you want to bring in, it will then mean a greater involvement of the government. And we heard Rituparna taking a stand saying that's probably not the right time to happen. And we hear Sabina saying that without that happening, this may not be a sector of choice, but a sector of force for many workers to take in. Yes, there probably is something in between for all of that. And of course, Gillian, I think what you mentioned in terms of, this is a sector which says work more, earn more. And the time zone in which you earn more is not sometimes best suited in our part of the world for a gender, So for women, whether it's surge cost for in Uber or for anything else. And I think these are things I hope that those who are in the corporate who are promoting gig platforms will keep in mind that it necessarily is not so much always about bringing in specific laws and regulations, but also as a corporate trying to tweak what your norms are for certain kinds of payment surges or non-payment surges, as a way you pointed out, proactive action being taken by the corporate. Probably that's a way which can also hold back some excessive legal action by government, because there is a huge demand, from a section to say this needs to be more regulated. But I do get your point, Ritu, when you say regulation means that you take away this whole employer-employee relationship, which actually is very steeped in power dynamics in our part of the world. And when you undo that power dynamic, what does it do to somebody who does not see himself as an employer, but as an independent worker? And with that independent comes certain costs. So are we going to take those costs and go with this format, or are we going to look for systems which will regulate it, and then maybe the cost may not turn out to be so attractive from the part of the employer? I think these are challenges. We are at the end of the time. Unless any of you, and this is you have 1 minute each to say any last comments that you might have before I close. So over to the panelists for a minute each, starting with whoever wants to go first. Well, I'm going to volunteer then. Abhay, I'm volunteering you because you look very comfortable listening to all of this. So any last 1 minute thoughts?
No, it's been a very interesting discussion. I think as gig work becomes more and more prevalent in the economy, these questions will only expand. And it's up to the platforms as well as the gig workers to work jointly together to make sure that we work together and make sure that we fulfill the social contract we signed up for. I think equally what Rituparna mentioned, gig work is a choice. It's not employment, and I think we must recognize that as well.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to go at this point? Yes, Ruchika. You took your camera, so I was like, look.
Sorry? I couldn't hear you, Nandita. Hello. Am I audible? Okay, so I just want to say, it has been a very enriching discussion. I mean, listening to all the panelists today. But I just want to say that it is definitely a choice for most of these people. But since informal economy permeates all of South Asia, not just India, so it's, you know, it's definitely not choice for everyone. They resort to informal activities or to gig economy because they do not have any other alternative opportunities available to them. And we can certainly leave the sector behind without labor protections. And this is certainly the need of the hour. And I guess I would be very happy to see something done in that regard. And these are my final thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Rituparna, were you wanting to say something? Yes, please.
One important aspect is, while we are trying to view the discussion around gig economy from either an employer or an employee perspective, I will switch and I would urge all of us to think about it from a consumer perspective. In the gig economy, the consumer is the king. And whenever we have discussions again around protection, legislation, wage security, let's for a minute pause and think, what about that carpenter who walks into our house through one of these aggregators? Who's supposed to be taking responsibility of wage security? Should I, as a consumer, take that responsibility, or the aggregator whose job was just to make that connect? And that's when still things will start falling in place. The moment the responsibility of that particular individual shifts onto the consumer, which essentially is the one who's availing the service, you will start seeing us looking at this whole problem very differently from the way we are looking at it now. I wanted to throw that in. Thank you.
Great perspective. I think the one major third critical player is the consumer. And I think clearly there isn't even much consumer awareness about this sector. It's only the COVID that we saw so many more people get engaged much more intensively with platform economies for whatever reasons. And I agree that there needs to be some greater discussion around that issue. Any other last comments? Else I will take this just to thank Jillian, sorry.
I just want to quickly say I would be sort of remiss to not mention that we need a lot more gender disaggregated data on the way that women are using, like similar to what Ruchika presented earlier, the way that women are actually using the platform economy. So there's data that we need on access, actual access, which there are huge gender gaps in terms of access in India, across South Asia, and also ownership, the concept of ownership, that's very particular when it comes to access. And you can only really get at those kind of dynamics often with qualitative research in addition to general surveys that can provide gender disaggregated data. And I think that we also need a lot of data on the actual use, the way women are using the platforms, the way they're combining it with offline activities, the way they're combining it with the pressures of their lives, the sort of the different ways that they're engaging with the full ecosystem of the platform economy, as Sabina mentioned earlier. I think we just need a lot more data to understand how women are using it, and that data is what we need to be able to provide policy advice, both to the government, to platforms, to consumers, to workers, about the kinds of initiatives and the kinds of policies that will actually make this more decent work across the board in terms of on-demand work, at least. But yeah, we need data.
Sabina, last to you.
Thank you so much, Nandita. Really quickly, I think Rituparna raises a really important point about the trilateral relationship between a technology intermediary, the provider, and the consumer. However, I think the important aspect there is also the degree of control that the technology intermediary exercises over the service provider, right? If I'm providing a service as a pure free entrepreneur, I should be able to set the price for my service. And in fact, we know that in many of the gig economy enterprises, that's not the case. It's the technology intermediary that sets the price, not in all of them, but in many of them. That's just an example of how I think we need to actually look in a nuanced way at what the nature of this relationship is. It is to some degree an employer-employee relationship under the guise of a technology intermediary that's brokering some other kind of relationship. So it's nothing like we've ever seen before. And therefore, and a lot more conflict. We actually need to think about how do we regulate or legislate for this service that we're providing to consumers through online platforms. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I could personally go on with this for long, but I know that we can't do that. So I really want to thank everybody, and I'm going to hand over the mic to Soumya to do the closing. And I think really honestly been an absolutely, engaging conversation. One of probably the best webinars that I have attended. And really a big thank you to all of you and to all the participants who have stayed on listening to this even this late in the hour. So Soumya, over to you. And again, from my side and from the HR Foundation, a big thank you to IWWAGE and all the panelists and the participants. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nandita, and thank you for an excellent moderation. It was really lively, and thanks a ton, really zillion times to all the panelists. I think this was really one of the best webinars, as Nandita said, for us as well, and especially on a topic that holds so much interest. And if I may say so, panelists, we may actually come back to you on pulling together some recommendations which you think may be useful. We've saved all the questions that came. We've done a recording of this session. It might actually be useful to come together with some sort of a note, which could have a sign off from all of you to put forth, to the government or whoever be the stakeholders in this regard. So thank you so much. It was really fascinating, really hearing all of you. And thank you, Nandita. Thank you to the Asia Foundation and everyone for patiently, it's nearly 7:45. So thank you so much, all of you, the attendees.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thanks. Appreciate it. And we will come back to you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Stay safe.